Hello, friends, and welcome to a special, one-of-a-kind, pre-introduction part of today's podcast. This podcast, which is a great episode with my friend Opeyemi Awe, I recorded several months ago. And a couple of things have delayed the release of today's podcast. Those of you who are loyal listeners, you know who you are, both of you will recognize that this podcast is coming out about a week, actually more than a week later than I intended it to. And so first of all, I want to apologize to Opeyemi for the delay in the podcast and thank her for her patience. There's a couple of things that went into the delay. Number one, you may have noticed, if you've been paying attention to the news, that here in Abu Dhabi, life has been a little chaotic. I am recording. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see not from my normal home studio, but from a hotel apartment where we have been moved for safety reasons. And then second of all, I'm hoping that you will not actually be able to hear this in the final recording, but we had some big time audio problems on Opeyemi's end when we record this. And it is taking me a lot of time with my very limited technical skills to figure out exactly why that is and how to deal with that. My hope is that when I finally get to release this, that I will have erased those problems and that you will largely not notice them. I do think there may be two things that I'm not able to fix. One is that there are little dropouts here and there where you may miss just half a word of what she's saying from time to time. And second of all, if you're watching this on YouTube, there were times when the program that I use to generate the captions automatically just was not picking up what she was saying, unfortunately. It is nonetheless, I'm really selling this, right? It is nonetheless a fantastic episode, a terrific conversation about a really interesting book. And I hope that you listen to the entire episode. And with no further ado, then let's get out of the pre-introduction and into the actual introduction for today's episode, in which I discuss disrupting Africa with Ope Awe. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Doug Reads with Friends. This is a podcast in which I call up my friends and we have a conversation about a book that they've chosen. Along the way, we also talk about who they are, our friendship, how we know one another, and I get to ask them a little bit about their lives. Really, I get to introduce you, most of whom are my friends, to other people I know and my other friends. It is a really wonderful excuse that I have to get to call up people that I miss and have a fun conversation. On today's podcast, we have Opeyemi Awe, and we are discussing the book Disrupting Africa by Professor Arewa. I say Professor Arewa because I don't know how to pronounce her first name. And I was having a little bit of a thought right before I started recording. Is it better for me to try to pronounce her first name and get it really, really wrong? Or is it better just to call her Professor Arewa? The right answer, of course, is for me to learn how to pronounce her first name. But my apologies to Professor Arewa for not knowing how to pronounce her first name. This is a really fun conversation. Ope is an astonishingly accomplished young person. She's one of the best students I've ever worked with. She's won multiple awards. She has gone on to the beginnings of a great career, and I think she's going to go on in the coming decades to do even more in Africa, particularly, and which is one of the reasons that she chose this book. This was a book that was quite unlike any of the others that we've read so far on this podcast, a book that challenged me, a book that pushed me, but also a book that changed how I think about a lot of different issues. So thanks for tuning in and enjoy this conversation with Opeyemi Awe about disrupting Africa. So a few episodes ago, I had a conversation with Alicia Hayes at the University of California at Berkeley, in which I talked a little bit about my work and my job and what I do. And I said then that I work with really outstanding students to help them apply for international opportunities and awards. And today we have a member of the Hall of Fame. We have one of the all-time greats. I'm going to embarrass you now, Ope, because it is rare that a student wins one of these awards. For a student to win 2 of these awards and then go on to earn a JD MBA is extraordinary. So I am thrilled today to welcome to the podcast Ope Awe, who I have known since she was a student at Cornell. And then she went on to be a Watson Fellow. She went on to be a Schwarzman Scholar in China. She went on to get her JD and MBA. She just got married. Everything's coming up, Ope.
Look at that. Congratulations. How are you?
Thank you.
Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And what a generous intro. I'm great. Life is great. Kind of things that you mentioned on the personal front, on the professional front, and feeling very restored and kind of like as it has been for the last few years. The world has been a little disorienting, but to sort of narrow down my world into the people that I care about, doing the things that I care about. Really good. So that's how I'm doing.
That's great. That's wonderful. So there's a lot here to talk about. I want to can we maybe start with the Watson Fellowship? Because first of all, it impacts directly what you chose, or I feel like it impacts directly what you chose for us to read together. And was a really interesting Watson. And it's about us because you came to Abu Dhabi during your Watson year to come visit. I don't think I've talked at all about what the Watson is on this podcast so far. Can you kind of explain the Watson a little bit? I'm sure you've had to do it a million times. And then talk a little bit about what your project was.
Sure. So the Watson Fellowship Foundation provides sort of 1 year fully funded opportunities for self-export. And so scholars from across liberal arts schools are given a stipend essentially and encouraged to go answer questions that they are curious about and travel the world to explore people, explore themselves in a way that can help think critically about something that sort of works them about the world. And so you talk about the sin being the catalyst for a lot of the things I'm interested in, but it was actually while I was at Grenat, right? Like I think that I really started to think about the power of entrepreneurship, about development, about what it takes to build a strong country. So what my fellowship allowed me to do was to look at countries at different phases in their development journey. I started in South Korea, which in the 60s was poor. It was poorer than Nigeria in the 60s. They were like, their primary export was like wood. And just to think about from the 60s to the global powerhouse that they are now in fashion and in electronics and the sciences, like what happened? How do they do that, right? And I think that was a question that was like really interesting to me. Then I went on to Brazil and Indonesia, which are two countries that like they ping in and out of. So is Brazil in? Is Indonesia in? Are they developing? Are they still struggling? And so these two nations that are always right on the cusp of change, of economic revival, that they just haven't really crossed that threshold. And then I went to Rwanda, and secretly, not secretly, Rwanda was my favorite country, secretly, not secretly, because I think I was so impressed by what they were doing economically and politically. So to transform a country, to have people from outside of the country want to come back, to have young people to invest in the development of the country, crazy fascinating to me. And so that's what my Watson to do was sort of entrepreneurship, the legal development, business environments, infrastructure, or like all things that I think are really important to building basis for an entrepreneurially dynamic country.
Where does the entrepreneurship come from? I think about entrepreneurship primarily in a business sense. I certainly think of you as a leader. You are a 2-time president of student government. You're someone who exudes leadership and charisma. But do you think about entrepreneurship primarily in terms of money, or are you thinking about it in other ways? And where does that interest come from?
When I think about entrepreneurship and leadership, you're right, that they are sort of complementary. But I think that entrepreneurship, business development, job creation are really important ways to help give people a foundation that allows them to take autonomy over their lives, right? So I think about most of Africa, entrepreneurs, right? Like there aren't Fortune 500 companies across most of sub-Saharan Africa, right? Like not yet, they're not there. So when I think about entrepreneurship, in addition to thinking about the big company, I'm thinking about like micro entrepreneurs. I'm thinking about people who just kind of want to get their stuff off the ground. And what does it take to succeed? And I think that when I was thinking about entrepreneurship, it's deeply connected with governance, right? Something that I say all the time is you can't entrepreneur your way out of bad governance, right? If the government is crap, if they don't support you, then I think that can be really detrimental to a nation's foundation. And then the other thing I think a lot about is there is a lot of issues with governance that I think will take time and creativity to address. And so think about entrepreneurship in some ways as like an immediate win, if you will, for people to sort of take to put the unrest. And I also think about China when I think about economic shift away from traditional communism and doing this hybrid capitalism communism that they have now. It was entrepreneurs. It was small farmers who were like, let's sort of see what this, capitalism. And of course, they weren't calling it that, but it was these small sort of farmer effort. I think it was like 100 provinces, and they started to come together and sort of trade, and then give each other capital, and then that helped them develop. And the government, smart as they were, let it happen in a small scale. Then when they started to see the ongoing benefits, then it was, how do we create infrastructure that will support this?
That leads a little bit into your Schwarzman year, which is a 1-year study in China at Tsinghua University, studying really China's role in the world. What made you want to go to Schwarzman, and how did that impact you, that experience?
So I think one of the things, and 100%, my Watson really led me into my Schwarzman, because I'm traveling to all these countries. I'm in Brazil, but I'm hopping over to Singapore and Malaysia, and I'm seeing what's going on in Peru. And across all of these markets, China was there. Whether doing development products, or in their market selling products, whether in the infrastructure that they had built. I'm like, what is China doing in Peru? What business does China have in Brazil? Make it make sense to me. And I think that started to get really curious about what is China's role across the world, right? And that's when I got introduced to concepts around the One Belt, One Road. That's when I started understanding China's both strategic and soft power, right? That China's trying to use to expand itself in the world stage. Where I spent summer in Ghana, and it was USAID projects, and I think I had grown accustomed to seeing in emerging markets, USA and the U.S. government sort of extending its arm of soft. But to see China do it, or just really? Deprecating. Wouldn't a thumb get, right? Is sort of what my initial role would be. And then once I opened my eyes to that, I was like, oh no, China is everywhere, especially across Africa. Now they're thinking 10, 20, 30 years down the line.
So you come back from Schwarzman and you go into consulting.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
From the reaction, I'm guessing there's some mixed feelings about that move into consulting.
So the first part is I needed money. I needed money. There's, the social justice warrior, I need dollars. And so there was that part. And then the other part is that I want to government consulting. So consulting then allowed me to see what does working in government look like, right? I talked a good game about, government and entrepreneurship and this and that. I was like, how does it work? Entrepreneurship business is one element, but also politics and policies and legal support.
So you go from consulting into law and business, which is a different world. What inspired that move? And did you get out of it what you thought you would get out of it?
And I think entrepreneurship, it's exclusively just starting businesses is the economic development as a catalyst to change. And I think entrepreneurship is a key part of that. And so another key part of that is the legal infrastructure, which is subpar in a lot of the places that I'm interested in. I think that economic development could be supported, right, by strong legal infrastructure. And so that's what I went to law school for, to really learn the language, to understand and how people think about legal infrastructure, if you will. And then so that was the law side, right? How do you build a strong legal infrastructure? What does it look like? And so that was what the law school part has helped me do. And the law school, it helped me break down big ideas and gave me a toolkit. And that's something that I had talked about a lot before going to law school. Some of the smartest people doing the most interesting things to me were lawyers, right? And I think it was in some ways the training that they got. And I to be true. I have found that to be true, that I think I'm much better equipped to tackle a lot of big problems because I went to law school. And, and then through my Watson and my Schwarzman, like I said, it was, but yeah, you can talk a good game about, law and legal reform, but if you don't know how to run a business, what are you going to be talking about? Like, you know what I'm trying to say? And so, like, with a certain level of, there's a reason I didn't do a PhD, right? I didn't want to intellectualize this process for myself. I really want to be like, how do you do this? Like, how does one create a business, create, sustain, fund, market a business? And so that I did my JD MBA. And maybe you can talk about this further on, but I think it's giving what I wanted it to give, it's getting right so far. So when I think about my interest in Nigeria in particular, it's not exclusively theoretical. I was born there. I go back often. I done internships. So building a hospital, it's a business, right? You have to charge patients for things, and thinking about, well, if you're not running it as a nonprofit and you're running it as a business, what infrastructure do you have to set in place? How do you develop a strategy? What does it look like to build strategic relationships with vendors or other community partners? What does it look like when you're with human capital and people and there's employment issues and employment law? What is employment law in Nigeria? What is the regulatory landscape for a business? Is there a regulatory landscape? And so I think that has interwoven for me the interest of what does it look like to start a business. And the other thing that I will say is when I think about the play between entrepreneurship and governance and whatnot, is you run a hospital, but the road to a hospital, tragic. It's tragic. The road might kill you on the way to go half a day. But if I'm an entrepreneur, is that my job? My job to put in electricity that can run to buy. Is it my job that I have to
Village to keep people from getting sick? Right.
Is that my job as an individual person? And sometimes I think about the greed of some of the very wealthy in Nigeria, especially entrepreneurs. I don't want to get too deep into that, but there's a certain level of greed, of like self-protection that emerges if you're an entrepreneur and you have to be your own sanitation worker. Where are you going to put your trash? You have to be your own electricity provider. You have to be your own waterworks. And so if I'm doing all of that to run my business, I'd be danged if it's like, oh, you're here, come. And like, that's the job of government. That's the job of government. And doing people's job of creating that, I'm talking physical infrastructure. I'm not even talking about legal. I'm just like, please, right? And it'd be one thing, but like, even if I had 40 naira, which is roughly like $400,000 to build a road, is that my job? Is that sustainable? Is that how we want people to thrive as business people? And I would argue the answer is from many other successful companies. So it's actually explained. So the answer is no.
What's the vision from here? You've spent more than a decade now building an absolutely phenomenal world-class resume. Watson Fellow, Schwarzman Scholar, consultant, JD, MBA. What are you going to do with it? Where does it take you from here? What's it all leading toward?
It's funny. I had some friends who were starting businesses like when I was in undergrad. They're like, oh, Maria, yeah, it's you. We would ever do that to ourselves. Well, do that. And I'm like, actually, that might be all right. I can do it. No, but I hope about that. But I actually do think working in business in the market like Nigeria, like I'd love to kind of work with startups that pay me. So usually I plan to see that pay me. So kind of help them navigate like what does it mean if we want to operate in 10, 15 markets across that, right? Like how do we bring it all together? And I think about, and so I did an internship at a law firm at Templars in Nigeria in summer 2023. And the the creativity that has to go behind supporting your clients to help them do anything that they want to do. But there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of wiggle room, especially because I was working in a firm that focuses on oil and gas. And so just the the multiple layer. Is it this law that we're working on? Or is it this one? So I just found it to be like deeply interesting and creative to me. And so, yeah, there is a universe that I would work for a law firm that does internationally focused business development for companies, work directly with them. There's a universe in which I start my own venture. There's a universe that I sort of work to build this sort of hospital and healthcare infrastructure, because we could talk healthcare. That's a whole other bucket that we could talk about. So yeah, and I guess candidly, I am in a place of exploration, just gathering information and developing a toolkit and being curious and building a network. And so now it's like, okay, so what do you even do about it? Is a question that actually I'm thinking deeply about right now.
Is your instinct that that's going to keep you in the U.S., or do you think it leads you back to Nigeria?
I'm trying to be on planes all the time, Doug. I'm trying to be here, there, and everywhere. It's ha, but no, my ideal is that I'm able to split my time between not just Nigeria, just the subcontinent. The questions that I'm asking about China in Africa, entrepreneurship in Africa, governance, it's like based in a lot of these other countries. Getting perspective and understanding how other people across the continent, how entrepreneurs across the continent are dealing with these persistent issues. I think I'd like to be an active part. So.
Well, this is leading us very directly into the book that you chose.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit first just about you as a reader. So what is your relationship with reading like? What is your relationship with books like, either growing up or today? You are shaking your head already.
So I knew you were going to ask the question, but growing up, I was an avid reader. I would read nonfiction, read fiction. I just really enjoyed reading. And then I would have like these phases of my reading journey, like it's like reading about like sci-fi novels about like Black women. So I was reading a lot of like Octavia Butler, and then I was really into like African authors as well. So I read a lot of like Chinua Achebe and Chimamanda, and there's one Kenyan author who I just be mispronouncing the name, so I don't. And so I read a lot growing up, and then I hit my collegiate experience, and I was forced to read. And so it was funny because once I like finished law school and like sort of was wrapping up the bar, I sat down and I picked up a fiction book. Doug, I read it in 48 hours. I was just like, I was like, I love to read. I love books. I've been reading like dense, like con law, creative law. I was just reading such dense things. I was like, I love to read. I mean, I'm talking like staying up to finish the book. Like, what's next? When I finished, I think I read 5 books in a week. I was just like ravenous. I was just could not get enough of books. And so this book is a little bit of a departure from what I read for like fun.
So what book did you choose, and what is maybe the back cover blurb for the book? How would you describe this book in a paragraph to somebody who's never heard of it before?
So this is the book, Disrupting Africa, and it's by Olufunmilayo Arewa, who is a scholar. I mean, very well accomplished. Top notch.
PhD,
MA. Yes, I could not agree more. And so it's a book that sort of takes a historical, cultural, political, legal lens on the infrastructure that colonialism had on Africa and what those implications were in terms of the internal and external dynamics that like shaped the continent, and talks a lot about how that foundation that colonialism had across the subcontinent, but her focus was primarily on Nigeria, has been established threads that we see now in terms of how our economy set up, how our legal infrastructure is or is not set up, politics and things like that. So I think it's a very like robust and dynamic book, very academic, very well researched. Very, very well researched. I think it provided a really, really in-depth like study about the thing I am also curious about, but like from like a historical perspective. And I think it also tied in a lot of like how happening colonial times, pre-colonial times, set the foundations for a lot of things that are challenging, right? Like the fact that the customary law, the you know, British colonial law in Nigeria, the post-independence like constitution, it's created this very complicated web of like whose rules are we using here? But like I think that the legal struggle, the struggle about accountability with governance, the issues surrounding not just government accountability, but also effectiveness, right? I think was something that I think the book touched on in an interesting way. And the other thing is, we was listening to a podcast, and I think one of the things that they talked about was post-colonialism, right? Like, was there, or not just was there, but this sort of lack of intellectual disengagement from the British, and like there was still a lot. So there was and is in many ways this like our minds never left. A lot of people's minds never left the like British way. And I think there is a sentiment of like things were just better when the British were here. At least we had schools. At least they built the road. At least, right? And so I think that podcast talks a lot about his very unique role in help decolonize people's minds. About what does it look like to not be under the thumb of colonial powers. If I like, I think what I'm saying is, if I were to get a PhD, it would likely be on a book, very simple like this, bringing together a lot of those threads, but also helping to think about what can be in the future. Somebody wrote a review about the book, and they said it makes a powerful case for fundamentally disrupting colonialism's enduring institutional legacies. It shows how the leveraging of disruptive technologies in Africa is being severely limited by the continuity of colonial legal frameworks, institutions, and standards, and their unequal and exploitative distributional pattern.
Yep, that's it. And I think also it gives you a sense of the tone of the book as well, right? This is a very serious, deeply researched, deeply academic book. We get all the way to page 10 before we get our first Foucault reference, right? It's not here to mess around. And you got to bring your A game when you're reading this book, because she goes dense and she goes deep. And that, again, that's not meant as a criticism in any way. She knows her stuff, but this is not a book you can lightly skim.
Not at all. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I enjoyed about the book, I do think in some ways it was helping me know like what's next, right? Like we can talk about colonialism, we can talk about bad governance, we can talk about a lot of the things, but it is sort of helping me, going back to the question you asked earlier, think about how does this all come together? Like, what is it like? Bring it all together and make it tight. Like, what does this mean? And so I think the book is helping me think, and has helped me think critically about like, what does that mean? Especially because I know she spoke a lot about some of the enduring issues. Like one thing that stuck out to me was she was saying a lot of the numbers and data that we have about Nigeria, Africa comes from like outside of Africa, right? Like they're out doing censuses, right? And I'm like, can you imagine making policy decisions about data that's not your own? Like, can you actually imagine? And I think what she did also quite effectively was, even though the book primarily focused on Nigeria or went back to Nigeria, her study of like Ghana, Malawi, Namibia, like I said, she really did her work. She did her things on this book. So, yeah.
She is Nigerian. Her focus is Nigeria. Her expertise is in Nigeria, but it's not limited to Nigeria. The word in the title is Africa. It's not disrupting Nigeria, it's disrupting Africa. It feels to me like a majority of the book is about Nigeria, but then the examples, as you said, she brings in quite broadly, and then also talks about how was French colonialism different, and how did different of Africa experience colonialism. They're thinking about it today. There's a quote from the book that was surprised by, and I thought, I want to get Ope's opinion on this. And it's relatively early on. It's page 77. She writes, corruption is the single greatest obstacle preventing Nigeria from achieving its enormous potential. Do you agree or disagree?
So I 100% agree. I do think that corruption is the largest hindrance to economic development, to people's livelihoods, and just a whole host of things. And I think that there's a couple of ways you can think about corruption is that it happens at the highest levels. You're talking presidents, you're talking about senators, you're talking about people in power. So the road example that I gave you, for example, if you were to look on paper somewhere in the records of, course, in Nigeria, I'm sure somebody has built this road. Sure that somebody was given a contract to build this road. I'm sure the person took the money, put sandbags on the road, and particular road. It's not the money, does. Nigeria is a top 10 oil producer. We have the money. It's where it's being directed to. It's who has access to it. It's the fact that the money is not being used to develop a sewage system, sewage infrastructure, or education, or really being funneled into these parts of the country or parts of the society that really need it, that it's sitting in the hands and the pockets of a very, very limited few. So that's sort of corruption at, I think, the highest level. And then there's a certain sort of like, especially around election times, where the people become pawns, if you will, in this game of corruption, where people are so desperate that, I mean, it's if you give them a T-shirt and a bag of rice, people be like, oh yeah, I'll vote for them. The way it's seeped into everyday life as well, and how people treat one another. And I'm only looking to get from you what I can get, right? That sort of like lack of individual care and concern about being like, well, part of the same country. We're kind of all going through the same struggle right now. And so the corruption that we see at the highest levels has become endemic in daily life, right? And I think the book at some point mentioned that they think like $586 billion has been taken out of the country. It's probably more. It's probably more.
What I thought was really interesting about her argument was, I mean, what you just said was that since independence, she would draw the argument back of corruption and stealing of resources right through colonialism, right?
Yeah.
Her it is essentially, where do you think people learned this from, right? The whole system was set up. The whole colonial system was set up as an extractive industry to come in, take Nigeria's wealth, and put that in the pockets of private individuals rather than
Use for the public.
Exactly. And that the system today is not a new system. It's not a system that Nigerians invented. It's a system that they inherited from the British and that they've just used to continue enriching themselves rather than putting in the reforms and disrupting the systems that in the ways that she thinks needs to be disrupted.
And, if we want to be honest, I think that is my own sort of internalized default, like, oh, this started independence, or, we have this great opportunity to fix this with an independence. No, this came from somewhere, right? And I think that's the other part about like infrastructure. It's not that it doesn't exist. There is infrastructure. It's just bad. It's just not effective. It's just exploitative, right? So yeah, you could build a house of wood. It's a house. There's infrastructure, but one might argue a house built of concrete would be better. You can make it better. And we didn't even talk about the bridge in particular. Sneaky bridge. Sneaky bridge. Let me tell you. And I think what she talked about that I found was interesting was the people who were deputized, the Nigerians who were deputized to facilitate this exploitation, and how, who was put in power, who was not. We're still dealing with the reverberating effects of that decades and hundreds of years later. I don't think that country could, quote unquote, recover, not to go back to where it was, right? But I think to get creative about what does this mean, right? Because I do think people are just allowing it to be because it's going to be. And I don't think at the highest level it's a sort of creativity or even desire. Let's talk about like people just don't want to, right? The people at the tippy top, because if you're benefiting this, why would you change? Right? People try to make emotional appeals. To lead governments. Oh, you all travel to Germany, you travel to the US, and you see how well they are. Why don't you come back and do that? Because they don't want to. Because they can get on the plane and go to Germany. They don't care. And so, I think about that sort of just like the lack of desire from those in power. And again, how I find that it's seeping through into into just everyday society. When I think about money and infrastructure as well, the things that I think about is two examples happen that relate to both infrastructure and development is Anthony Joshua, who's like a well-known boxer. He's a Nigerian British boxer. He recently went to Nigeria and was in a car accident that killed two of his like very, very close friends, right? And why were they in a car accident? Bad roads, bad roads. But your money can't save you from that. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who everybody knows, she has twins, and one of her twins died while in a hospital in Nigeria. One can argue that both of these people have money. They have money. They have the resource. Your money can't save you. Your money cannot save you. The system is messed up. It doesn't care. It doesn't care, right? And that's from the healthcare system. When I think about the educational system and how it's failed at this point, multiple generations of people, how can they be creative when the way that they're being taught hasn't evolved? I think about this woman, a Northwestern grad. She started a business in Nigeria. It was like a juicing business. One day she wakes up and it is on Twitter or somebody's calling her, one of the two. Your business is being razed to the ground. There is a bulldozer down your business right now. Why? Because of a land dispute that the senator in the place had with, she didn't pay the taxes. Yes, she did. Yes, she did. You have to. Right. So it's stories like this where I'm like, you're actively making things worse for people.
What I appreciate about this book is the context of that, right? I've spent a little bit of time in Africa. I did a semester in Zimbabwe in college. You know, I've visited Southern Africa a fair amount, but I am by no means an expert. But it's not hard to kind of enumerate, as you just did, the challenges with infrastructure, with healthcare, with education, with corruption, et cetera. What I appreciate about this book is tracing that backwards, right? And maybe it's the history major in me of saying this didn't come from nowhere, right? These challenges are not the inventions of Africans. This was all planned by the colonizer states that came in and said, we're going to invest enough here to be able to extract from you, but we're using this for our benefit, and we're going to set up systems that are not beneficial to the Africans who have to live under them.
Require a little bit of sensitivity, understanding of like exactly what you're saying, that the way that Nigerians are experiencing the country, the nation right now, it's on purpose. Nigerians didn't just wake up one day, steal hundreds of millions from my country. That sounds like a good idea. No, it was a system that said, yes, do this, right? It's good for you, but it was good for you because it was good for that, right? And empowering individual people. So I actually do think that, what I was looking for was a bit more sensitivity, a bit more like cultural, historic sensitivity to the fact that it runs deep, the issues that we're facing. But that, I think, then is, if the issues are running so deep, then the creativity, right? Then it's like, then you can't look at China, then you can't look at America. You have to get really creative, because it's like, what does it mean for us to move beyond this really deep, really, really, really challenging foundation that we have been given? And I think it's the creativity. And the one thing that Africans are, Nigerians are, we are creative as hell, Dad. I'm telling you, when our minds are set to something, and I always joke about, like, that a lot of people make stew in Nigeria, and peppers, everybody needs peppers and tomatoes and stuff. So there was a time where there was like a massive infestation of peppers, right? So you couldn't make your stews. So instead of being like, what do you mean our agricultural system can't fix that? What do you mean an entire country is crippled by a pepper shortage? Instead of asking those questions, they said, we're just going to make soup without peppers. We're just going to figure it out. So they made pepperless stews. I know, it was just like creative. Y'all be thinking.
Well, I'm very glad that you are putting your enormous brain and your great talents and your charisma and your smarts and your caring. Like, this is a topic you care a lot about, and you have I knew you when you were 20 years old to go and work on these problems in Nigeria and get on a plane all the time. I don't know where it's going to take you, but I am super excited to see where the coming decades take you and what you end up doing.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
One thing I ask all my guests to do, talk a little bit about, all right, I want to see you again. I want to meet up with you again somewhere. We've met in Iowa. We've met in we've met in DC. When and how might we meet up next? Maybe inspired by this book.
Okay, so I know everybody would think I would say, let's meet in Egypt, but alas, I won't. I would love for us to meet in Rwanda. I would love for us to meet in Rwanda because they have gorillas and they have incredible wildlife. And I know that's up your alley. And it's incredibly beautiful. And it's been well over a decade since I've been there. It's like my heart has never left. My heart has never left. So I would love to go look at some beautiful gorillas in Rwanda with you.
I would love to do that. I will tell you that gorilla trekking in Rwanda or Uganda is way, 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 way up on my list of things that's a top 5 bucket list.
There we go. Let's do it. My family at this point, they're like, God dang, girl, you've been talking about Rwanda for a decade. Let's all go. Everybody go to Rwanda.
Bring your new husband. I can meet him for the first time.
Yeah.
Thrilled to meet him. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll go to Africa. We'll go to Rwanda and we'll go gorilla trekking together.
Definitely. Amazing.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
For this book. Without you, I learned a lot from this book.
Yeah.
It's a delight to connect with you again. Thanks, cast, and thank you for being my friend. Okay, friends, there you have it. What a great conversation with Ope. An absolutely astonishing person, one of my favorite students I've ever worked with, obvious reason, and someone who I think is just on a rocket ship from here. I'm really, really excited to see in the coming decades the work that she does and the difference that she makes, and perhaps the role that this book plays in helping her think about the changes that she wants to make. So thank you, Ope, again, for being my friend and for coming on the podcast. For the next episode, I will be talking with Hazel Raja, my former boss, about the book This American Woman by Izarna Garb. That will be out later this month on March 20th. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you have any questions or comments or critiques, please email me at dougreadswithfriends@gmail.com. Doug Reads with Friends is now available on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, and of course on YouTube. I hope that you will follow those channels for clips from these programs and to connect with other people who are listening. I know you've heard this on every podcast you've ever listened to, but it really does make a difference if you take a moment to like this podcast, to rate it, to review it, maybe leave a comment on it as well. Thank you so much for doing so. Music for Doug Reads with Friends provided by my friend, Aaron Caffel. Aaron is a deeply talented musician and someone who I've known for a very long time. Thank you to Aaron for providing her music, and please check out Aaron's other music on Spotify. Friends, thank you for listening to Doug Reads with Friends. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for being my friend.